原宣多媒体报道，加州洛杉矶郡人际关系委员会12月7日发布2021年仇恨犯罪报告。报告显示，2021年洛杉矶郡仇恨犯罪增长 23%， 仇恨犯罪中 74% 具暴力性质，均为2002年以来最高数据。根据这份年度报告，2021年洛杉矶郡仇恨犯罪从前一年的641起增至786起，各种动机的仇恨犯罪都有所增长，但源于种族歧视的仇恨犯罪增加最多，从前一年的406起增至473起，增幅约 17%。相对2020年反亚裔仇恨犯罪同比猛增 84%， 2021年增幅有所降低，但报告同时指出，2021年针对亚裔仇恨犯罪在全部种族歧视仇恨犯罪中占比高达 16%， 首次超过亚裔在洛杉矶郡居民总人口中的比例。但是当地媒体的新闻报道只是给予这个增长一个简略的提及，而没有提及仇恨犯罪在亚裔社区中突兀的大幅度增长。仇恨犯罪或多或少都会影响到我们每一个人。当可能成为目标受害者的恐惧影响到了商家及顾客，因怕被受到攻击而远离时，仇恨犯罪增长对整个加州的经济活力有最大的影响。行动反仇恨联盟不只是谈论解决方案，而是以具体解决方案为重点，将所有每个领域利益相关者聚集起来，集思广益。本次会议讨论了仇恨犯罪对于经济的影响，以及探讨仇恨犯罪与恐怖主义的共同点，即由1980年代至今的历史角度来探讨仇恨犯罪以及犯罪的目标社区。行动反对仇恨联盟于12月14日上午11点召开网上会议，会议的主题是从历史角度剖析仇恨犯罪及其对我们经济的影响。会议由前加州参议员及共和党参议院领袖夏乐柏和反对仇恨联盟创始人何美湄共同主持。发言嘉宾有加州财政部长菲奥娜、南加大普莱斯公共政策学院研究教授亚当·罗斯，民权律师和彩虹群体领袖约翰·杜兰。
Documenting a 23% jump in county hate crimes from the previous year. While the official report noted that Asian hate crimes once again recorded the largest percentage increase, local news coverage only gave a glancing reference without documenting the dramatic rise of 67% increase in hate crimes against Asian community, on top of 84% rise the previous year. One major implication of all hate crime growth is on the state's economic vitality, as fear of being victimized can affect businesses by making them targets, or by keeping customers away out of fear of being attacked. Act Against Hate Alliance goes beyond the talk to identify solutions, and to do so is bringing together stakeholders from every sector with a solution-specific focus. This program will consider the economic impact of hate crimes and address their similarity to terrorism, and will also explore a more historical view of hate crimes and their targeted communities from the 1980s to present day. Back to
elected positions that I've played. And it is just, terrifying for our community, especially during COVID, where we have been trying to protect our elders. I live with my father, who's 88 years old, from the COVID, and then also needing to protect them when they are not at their houses, and seeing the hate in Asian hate crimes. I do think, and I do agree with you, that we need more data and statistics. We are very happy when district attorneys are now digging into these type of crimes and actually calling them what they are, Asian hate crimes, so that we can monitor and make sure that we are protecting our communities. I also recently helped the United Peace Collaborative start their nonprofit, get all their nonprofit paperwork in order. For the last 2 years, they have been creating and organizing volunteers to patrol the streets of Chinatown. They have been doing it 24/7. And thanks to organizations like yours and others, the Lions Club, different, the Parks Alliance, different neighborhood watch groups, crimes are going down, but they are still happening. Jewelry stores in San Francisco, Chinatown, still continue to face robberies. Teenage shoplifters are going around knowing the limit in terms of how much they can take from a store without being prosecuted. Elderly women especially have been still mugged and beaten on our streets. And so we all still need to be highly, highly vigilant of our communities. I'm very happy to report that in September of this year, Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order that established California's first Racial Equity Commission. This commission will recommend tools, methodologies, and opportunities to advance racial equity and will be available to provide direct assistance to state agencies in reviewing and updating policies and practices upon request. This is thanks to Senator Richard Pan, who is a fellow member of our California Asian American and Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus and collaborating racial equity organizations. 2 recent bills were also chaptered and signed by Governor Newsom. AB 2488 by Assemblymember Ting requires the
domestic terrorist attack, that of the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. So let's go to the next slide. To put things in perspective, these are the largest disasters of the 21st century, not including COVID and not including Hurricane Ian recently, but you can see at the bottom of that list, it's actually the first in chronological order. In terms of direct impacts on gross domestic product, 9/11 stands out by far, and also in terms of the number of deaths as well. Hurricane Ian is pretty large, but doesn't come close to the GDP impacts. To give you some perspective, though, we've recently done some work on COVID, and the estimate is the GDP impacts there are as much as $5 trillion, and we all know that COVID has killed more than 1 million people, so that's not to be ignored as well. But the largest disaster otherwise of the 21st century still is 9/11. Let's go to the next slide. In the 10th anniversary of 9/11, the New York Times published an article looking at various estimates of that event. And the first one, if we start with toll and physical damage, that's a combination of the value of the Trade Center and the death toll. That's on the order of 55 billion. And the Trade Center was on the order of, in 2011 dollars, 32 billion. The second set of cubes, economic impact of 123 billion, that's my estimate in a paper I published in 2009 of the direct and indirect GDP impacts of that event. But others have suggested that the economic costs of terrorism, especially the 9/11 event, are much greater if you factor in Homeland Security and related costs of establishing and running the Department of Homeland Security, 589 billion. The war funding, some people have suggested is applicable in terms of the war.
Let's talk about what that means under California law. A hate crime is not a separate crime. It is a special allegation in a criminal complaint to enhance the penalties or punishment when a crime is motivated by hatred towards another because of differences. There's always another underlying crime: assault, battery, assault with a deadly weapon. Criminal threats, what used to be called terrorist threats, is now called criminal threats, arson. Those are all the underlying crimes. And I've talked to prosecutors and law enforcement personnel, and they say, well, aren't all crimes somewhat motivated by hate? I say, well, okay, some of them are. Some are motivated by crystal meth. Some are motivated by poverty. Some are motivated by people trying to get money to fund their drug problem. So crimes aren't necessarily motivated by hate, although some are. So what happens when a hate crime occurs? What is the distinction between just a general crime, maybe motivated by hate, or a hate crime? Well, a hate crime is meant to terrorize a community of people, as Professor Rose was just alluding to in his presentation. It's meant to make people feel fearful in their synagogues, in their churches, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in the places that they know one another, they know their neighbors, they know their institutions. It's to make fear perpetrate an entire level of community. And that's a little different than just a crime committed against an individual when the target is a community of people. So that's the crime part of it. Now let's talk about the other side, which is the hate part of it. You know, I've been in politics now for a very long time, over 40 years. And I guess if I found another system that would help improve the quality of people's lives, I'd go play that game. But I like the game of politics because I think it is possible to pass legislation and to have discussions like this and to have government work for its people in order to address issues like this. But there is another part of all this that sometimes doesn't get as much attention as passing laws or statutes. Are laws and statutes needed? Yes. Because if nothing else, they serve as a deterrent for others to make sure they don't commit hate crimes when they see somebody being punished. But really, there are cultural forces that are constantly at play that I think have a far bigger impact on how we come up against each other when our cultures begin to mix. You know, I'm a native Angelino. I was born and raised here. I was born in Lincoln.
Spanning 4 decades or longer, but also the recognition of this goes back to the beginning of time. But you know what has been concerning to us, and certainly to the legislature that funded a lot of outreach dollars for this program, is just the spike recently. And you touched upon something when looking for the, you said we have to get to the root causes, miscommunication and revival of old prejudices. You know, prejudices ebb and flow, right? And it goes back to that tribalism. So do really appreciate your comment. When it comes to Asian discrimination, we've mentioned this before, but the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was started in California because the Chinese were 10% of the population and the labor force was concerned they were going to continue to take all the jobs. So they decided to just preemptively kick them out of the US, and they got Congress to pass some legislation. And it took until the 40s and really the 60s to reverse that. But it's also jobs now. When you see when the spike started, part of it was blaming, I think, the Chinese for the, you know, we call it the Wuhan virus, the China virus, the Chinese virus, a lot of different names, but that sort of spotlighted one group that everybody else piled onto. And certainly the trade wars didn't, and I'm a, you know, I consider myself a political moderate as well, different party from you, John, but you know, when we start looking to one group and blaming them for our causes, you know, it's never going to end up in a good place. And I think that probably is what spiked this current growth in the Asian hate crimes, particularly. So let me segue a little bit. So Professor talked about terrorism, and I was thinking about that. Terrorism, as we typically think about it, is an order of magnitude. When you blow up a government building with fertilizer and diesel, or when you use a plane to attack a building. But you know, certainly the same principles are just on a smaller scale when somebody attacks a building or scrawls hate words on that for their ethnicity or sexual preference or race, and those are the things that we primarily deal with here. But we have a question from Sunita that I see in the chat. It says, Dr. Rose, are you
元勋多媒体报道，谢谢收看。